Welcome. My name is Kat McNeal, and I'm a member of the US-based Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality and volunteer staff at the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. Today, we're commemorating the 8th anniversary of the Odessa massacre, which took place on May 2nd, 2014, during which at least 42 people were killed by a right-wing mob. We have 3 speakers for you today, but first, I would like to present a joint appeal from the Odessa Solidarity Campaign, the Coop Anti-War Cafe of Berlin, the Union of Political Emigrants and Political Prisoners of Ukraine, and the Red Square Molotov Club. An appeal for international solidarity with the people of Odessa. No to fascism, no to NATO, yes to a multipolar world based on cooperation, not confrontation. Now more than ever, in light of the escalating military and political confrontation between Western powers and the Russian Federation and its allies, we must remember what has led to the current crisis. On May 2nd, 2014, an event happened in Odessa, Ukraine that has been called one of the worst civil disturbances in Europe since World War II. A much smaller group of progressives into the city's House of Trade Unions and then set the building on fire. At least 42 people died from the flames and smoke inhalation or by being beaten to death as they tried to escape the burning building. To this day, not one of the perpetrators has been punished, even though the attack was documented by scores of people who posted videos of the event online. This Odessa massacre occurred just a few months after the violent right-wing coup that overthrew the elected president of Ukraine with support from Western powers, especially the United States. Since then, the country as a whole has increasingly been used as a pawn in the US-NATO strategy to militarily, politically, and diplomatically isolate Russia, while the neo-Nazi organizations that participated in the coup have grown in numbers and financial backing. Today, videos of horrendous abuses committed against minorities, pro-Russian people, and Russian prisoners of war can be seen online. All this is part of an ongoing and increasingly aggressive campaign by the US government and its allies against progressive movements and governments around the globe. It is part of a desperate attempt to slow the development of a multipolar world based on cooperation instead of confrontation. This destructive policy of military intervention and illegal regime change has led to a military confrontation with Russia that could trigger a new world war. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian government has banned 11 political parties, taken control of the country's television stations, and arrest journalists and leftists, all while ignoring the increasingly frequent violent attacks by neo-Nazis against anyone they view as not sufficiently nationalistic. We must confront all this with acts of international solidarity. Every year on May 2nd, the courageous people of Odessa come out to the House of Trade Unions, where they display pictures of those who died there, lay red roses, and release black balloons as symbols of mourning. And every year, they renew their call for an international investigation of the massacre, something the Ukrainian government has never allowed. And they do this despite the ever-present threat of being attacked by the neo-Nazis, who have taken to mark the day with mass marches in the city. Also on May 2nd, anti-fascists in other countries hold actions in solidarity with the people of Odessa and in support of their demand for an international investigation. In 2021, more than 20 cities participated across Europe and North America. These actions not only let the people of Odessa know that they are not alone, they also help inform people in other countries about the 2014 coup, the role of the neo-Nazi organizations, and the true character of the Ukrainian government, which is portrayed in the West as a struggling democracy and not the right-wing pawn of the West that it really is. And in holding these actions, anti-fascists in many different countries help build ties of solidarity among themselves, a sorely needed development in this divided world. The Odessa Solidarity Campaign was founded in 2016 to support the anti-fascist people of Odessa. Now, in cooperation with the Union of Political Emigrants and Political Prisoners of Ukraine and the Co-op Anti-War Cafe in Berlin, the OSC is appealing to anti-fascist forces throughout the world to commit to holding a local event on May 2nd, 2022. This could be a public meeting, a rally, a march, or even just a few people holding red roses, black balloons, and signs declaring solidarity with Odessa. The number of participants is less important than the number of events because we are trying to show that people in many countries are aware of what is happening in Odessa in 2014 and are still demanding an international investigation. This is especially important now in light of the ongoing military confrontation in Ukraine, which is confusing many people in the progressive movements. If your organization is willing to commit to some kind of action on May 2nd, Please send the name of your organization, your contact information, and the name of the city where the action will take place, and, if possible, any details about the action to the Odessa Solidarity Campaign at DefendersFJE@hotmail.com. You can also email the campaign at this address with any questions, comments, or suggestions. For a world free from war and fascism, Odessa Solidarity Campaign, Co-op Anti-War Cafe, Union of Political Emigrants and Political Prisoners of Ukraine, Red Square Molotov Club. You can find this appeal and the contact information of the organizations listed where this webinar is posted. Now I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, Phil Wilayto, who will be providing background information on the present crisis in Ukraine. Phil Wilayto is a lifetime anti-war and anti-racist organizer, co-founder of the Virginia Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality in Richmond, Virginia, USA, editor of the Virginia Defender newspaper, and coordinator of the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. In 2016, he organized a delegation of US peace activists who traveled to Odessa, Ukraine, as international observers to attend the second annual memorial to the victims of the Odessa massacre. Since then, the campaign has called for local actions every year on May 2nd to honor the victims of the massacre and support the demand of the people of Odessa for an international investigation into the killings, something the Ukrainian government has never allowed. Phil is also the author of several books, including In Defense of Iran, Notes from a US Peace Delegation's Journey through the Islamic Republic. All right, Phil, you have the floor.
Thanks, Kat. And hi to Heinrich and to Leo. Really honored to be part of this webinar today. There's a crisis that we all have been following in Ukraine. And unlike, I would say, any other war that the U.S. has been involved in for at least the past 50 years, there is a completely seamless narrative coming out from Washington and the mainstream media without a hint of skepticism or doubt. That there is one view of what is going on, and anyone who questions it must be a dupe of the Russian government or worse. It's stunning to me that after all of these years of watching official Washington narratives unfold, and then be exposed as lies from the Gulf of Tonkin incident that gave President Lyndon Johnson a blank check to conduct the Vietnam War, to the weapons of mass destruction hoax in Iraq, that there is so little questioning of what we are hearing. And that's not to say that everything is wrong or incorrect or a lie. It's just that we are missing that, what I would call a healthy skepticism. I think what we're going to do today is to present a different view. It's like pulling back the curtain and saying, here's what they're not telling you. Here's what's going on that challenges the official narrative. And whether or not you accept what we're saying, we hope by the end of the webinar that you will at least begin to question what you have been told and how the U.S. is involved and how we got to this point. So the story that we are being told is that the present crisis in Ukraine goes back to 2014, when we are told that Russia invaded the peninsula of Crimea and annexed it in a land grab, and then supported separatist movement in the Donbass area of eastern Ukraine. And that this is an example of Russian aggression and expansionism. Rarely do we hear about the right-wing coup that took place in February of 2014, or the Odessa massacre that took place on May 2nd of 2014. To understand the right-wing coup, we have to go back even further to talk about NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was formed in 1948 After World War II, the United States, which had been in alliance with the Soviet Union against the Nazis, decided that, oh yeah, we forgot, Soviet Union is really socialist and we hate that, so they're our enemy again. And they formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, with 12 members, Canada, the United States, and 10 countries, all in Western Europe. By 1991, the Soviet Union was collapsing. And the US wanted to see Germany, which had been divided into a capitalist West and a socialist East, reunited. And Russia was concerned about this because of their experience with Germany in World War II, when the Nazis invaded and slaughtered some 20 million Russian people, as well as 1/3 of their industrial capacity. So they were reluctant to see Germany reunited. Then Secretary of State James Baker told Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev that if you agree to the reunification of Germany, we promise not to allow NATO to expand 1 inch eastward. Gorbachev agreed, Germany was united, and today all 14 new members of NATO since 1991 have been to the east, former republics of the Soviet Union or sections of the former socialist country of Yugoslavia. We have a map of NATO updated that shows what Europe looks like today, with the NATO members virtually encircling Russia on its western flank. The only countries that border Russia that are not members of NATO are Finland, Belarus, Ukraine, and Georgia. And Finland and Georgia and Ukraine have all stated that they want to join NATO. So this means that Russia is facing a solid bloc, or would be if Ukraine joined NATO, a solid bloc of countries that are hostile to it. Now, why is the West hostile to Russia? It's hostile because it views Russia as a competitor. It's a large country. It's the largest country in the world in terms of landmass. It makes up 40% of the landmass of Europe, with the other 75% of Russia being in Asia. It's an economic competitor, and the United States does not countenance competitors, and wants to achieve what it calls full spectrum dominance, meaning hegemony, meaning the United States controls the world economically and militarily. So it views Russia as a problem, and it has vilified Russia in every possible way, so that the public image here in the United States is that Russia just is an awful country. There's nothing good about it whatsoever. You can look at a country like Saudi Arabia, which has no democracy, which practices the most hideous forms of corporal punishment, but it's never viewed, as a particular problem, because the United States views it as an ally. At the present stage, Ukraine has in its constitution the statement that it desires to join NATO. But that position, that stance, was greatly strengthened and intensified after the right-wing coup of 2014. Now, in order to understand the coup and its real significance, because we're told it was a democratic revolution, a revolution of dignity, a revolution where the people of Ukraine took their country back from a corrupt authoritarian figure. We have to go back to the roots of Ukrainian nationalism. Most countries are nationalist to one degree or another, but they can be progressive nationalism, the Vietnamese fighting back against the U.S. invasion of their country, or the Palestinians attempting to establish a statehood, or it can be a reactionary nationalism like we saw under Nazi Germany. Ukrainian nationalism has generally been right-wing. And in the 20th century, its most prominent proponent was a man named Stefan Bandera, who led a faction of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, and that blocked with the Nazi occupation of Ukraine, and was responsible for many, many massacres of Jews, of Poles, of Soviet prisoners of war. Bandera's goal was an independent fascist Ukraine, and Nazi Germany was willing to use him as a force against the Soviet Union, but not to allow independence. So at times Bandera was an ally, and at times he was repressed by the Nazis. But today he's viewed as, among Ukrainian nationalists, and particularly ultranationalists, as the leader of Ukrainian nationalism. On January 1st, 2009, his 100th birthday, there were marches and celebrations across Ukraine, and the government issued a postage stamp with his portrait on it. We have a slide of that postage stamp. There's a statue of him, a large statue in Lviv in the western part of Ukraine, and in another half dozen Ukrainian cities. The slide number 4 there shows support for Bandera at a soccer match held in the city of Donetsk in the Donbass before the 2014 coup. Which shows that two things, that the ultras, as they're called, the extreme soccer fans, are political and largely right-wing, and that Bandera was popular among them. This brings us to the Maidan protests of 2013 and 2014. Slide number 5 shows a protest, the scene of large mass protests that took place in the capital of Kiev, in the square called Euromaidan. And it began as a popular protest against corruption and the fact that the president of Ukraine at the time wanted closer economic relations with Russia, while the parliament and many of the people wanted closer economic relationships with Europe and the European Union. That protest, that mass protest, was overtaken by paramilitary fascist organizations that escalated the conflict from a protest, peaceful protest, to a violent coup. And Bandera's legacy was prominent in that right-wing movement. And we have a image of a march that took place on Bandera's birthday on January 1st, 2014, in Kiev, a mass march of some 15,000 Bandera supporters. And this is never mentioned. You would never know that something like this happened, that 15,000 fascists marched in the capital city of Kiev during the Euromaidan protests. And we have an image, graph 7, of the headquarters of the Euromaidan movement, and a large poster of Stefan Bandera on the wall of the building. Now, the United States was up to its eyeballs in support for the coup. Slide 8 is of John McCain, U.S. Senator, who traveled several times to Kiev during the protest, spoke at mass rallies, mingled with the people, and expressed U.S. support for the Euromaidan movement. Also, Victoria Nuland, who was the Assistant Secretary of State for Eastern European Affairs, traveled many times to Kiev. And in slide 9, she's shown handing out pastries or cookies. I've seen it described different ways to the protesters. What was more interesting was slide number 10, when she was speaking in December 2013 to an organization called the U.S.-Ukraine Foundation, a non-governmental agency that, quote, promotes democracy in Ukraine. And she had just come back from her third trip to Ukraine in 5 weeks. And she said at this meeting, and there's a video of this, since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance, all of which are preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We have invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine and these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine. The United States spent $5 billion from the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the establishment of an independent Ukraine until the time of the Maidan coup, $5 billion to promote democracy. In other words, to train people to overthrow the government in one way or another, violent means, so-called color revolution means, but a change. Why? Because Ukraine was a country that still had many sections of its economy owned by the state. And they wanted loans from the International Monetary Fund, and the IMF said, that's fine, we'll give you loans, but you have to restructure your economy. And when a formerly socialist country begins to sell off its state-owned properties, those who have money are the only ones who can buy it. And this leads to the development of small oligarchs into big oligarchs who then can play an oversized role in the country's political life. That's what happens. The introduction of market economies into formerly socialist countries inevitably leads to authoritarian, undemocratic governments. And the United States poured $5 billion into that. Now, this Euromaidan movement began on November 21st, 2013, with the large protests in the Euromaidan Square in Kiev. By February 25th of 2014, President
Viktor Yanukovych
was overthrown. He was replaced with an interim president, the head of the Rada or parliament, and then by the elected president, Petro Poroshenko, who actively promoted the right-wing organizations, the paramilitary organizations, the fascist ultranationalist organizations that played the key role in the overthrow of the previous government. Played up the ultranationalism and adopted the slogan of the Bandera movement as the official slogan for the Ukrainian military. And that slogan is "Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes," which is now being repeated by liberals in the United States in solidarity with the people of Ukraine, not knowing that it is in fact a fascist slogan. The Russian minority in Ukraine, which makes up some 17% of the country, with some 30% of the country speaking Russian as a primary language, saw what was happening with the coup. They saw how the Russian language was banned for official use under the new government. They saw that the paramilitary organizations, which trace their beginnings to the anti-Soviet neo-Nazi organizations of World War II, and they were not willing to live under a government that tolerated that type of fascism. On March 16, 2014, there was a referendum in the peninsula of Crimea. The people voted overwhelmingly to separate from Ukraine and rejoin Russia, which they had been part of the Republic of Russia for 300 years, until 1954, when it was administratively transferred to Ukraine. On April 7th, the Donetsk People's Republic was formed in the Donbass, an independent republic that separated from Ukraine. On May 2nd, the Odessa massacre, when a fascist-led mob attacked a much smaller group of progressives at the House of Trade Unions, burnt the building, and slaughtered
at least 42 people.
On May 11th, the referendum on the status of Luhansk Oblast province took place, and the People's Republic of Luhansk was established. This is the background to the present crisis. The steady expansion of NATO to the very borders of Russia, the U.S. supported 2014 right-wing coup, and that led to the separation by the people of Crimea and the Donbass. And finally, the Russian government looked out at what was happening all around it and said, we are surrounded by hostile NATO countries. We have a right-wing government in Ukraine. It's only a matter of time before there's either a military conflict or they try to bring us down through a color revolution, and they responded. The position of the Odessa Solidarity Campaign is we are not endorsing the Russian invasion, but neither are we condemning it. What we're trying to do is explain the process of NATO Eastern expansion and the right-wing coup of 2014 as the conditions that led to the present crisis. And that is why we call for no war on Russia, which is actually what is happening, a U.S. proxy war with the U.S. supplying the military weapons and ammunition and imposing the sanctions, providing military intelligence. And it's quite logical to assume the U.S. is actually directing the war, because they don't give billions of dollars away without holding the strings. So no war on Russia, no to sanctions, no to NATO, stop the wars at home and abroad, remember the Odessa massacre, and long live the freedom-fighting anti-fascist people of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Our next speaker, Leo, will fill us in further on the political oppression now taking place in Ukraine. Leonid Ilderkin is a member of the Coordination Council of the Union of Political Immigrants and Political Prisoners of Ukraine. He has been active in various public organizations in Ukraine since 1989, responsible for duties such as social engineering, designing of organizational structures, procedures and regulations, fundraising, management and monitoring of social projects, organization of training, seminars and conferences, and working with the media and public relations. Leonid also participated in various volunteer and social programs. From 2010, he was assistant to a district council member in the city of Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine. He also was head of the department of the headquarters of the election campaign on elections to the Verkhovna Rada, or parliament, in Dnipropetrovsk. After the start of the civil conflict in Ukraine, he was forced to leave the country and now lives outside of Moscow, Russia. All right, take it away, Leo.
Thank you very much, dear friends, dear colleagues, for inviting me into this very needed and very much informational, correct conversation which we have to hold in this exactly time, because this time is time when we come close to remember the date of the tragedy of Odessa, which happened in the 2nd of May of 2014. The issue of political repressions in Ukraine has roots in the nature of Ukrainian regime of today and in the past. The issue has several dimensions. First of all, we need to understand that after the coup d'etat in 2014, starting from February, the forces of the coup, somebody who we call neo-Nazis, and mostly there were neo-Nazis, but there were also militants which were plainly with no ideology. They were hired, they were employed by the competing oligarchs of that time, because the coup d'etat happened there mostly because of the struggle in the highest echelon, highest circles of Ukrainian bourgeois. They start to employ militants into groups, arm them, and direct them against their competitors. In the end, the groups of oligarchy who wanted to remove that time elected president Viktor Yanukovych, they could succeed, and they successfully pushed him away from the capital city and then eventually from the country. This what happened in February of 2014. In that time, in Parliament of Ukraine, there was very strong party to support the president Viktor Yanukovych. It was Party of Regions, and there was good and strong positions of Communist Party of Ukraine that I was belong to. Parliament, so to say, was not with the only one opinion or with the, some type of common view. There was very great struggle in Parliament by political matters. And then suddenly, when this groups of militants, again, they were hired by the competing oligarchy and revived growing neo-Nazi groups, they start to implement matters of not political origin, but matters of plainly violence against their opponents. Straight after this coup d'etat that happened, when the forces of government of that time decided to step back, hold basically neutrality, and since the president was left, there was vacuum of power, so to say. There was situation for about a month and a half in the capital city, but not only there, but for the rest of the country, when police and forces of what is called internal guards, which is basically like a type of army inside of country for holding, like for instance, they were guards in prisons, and they were used as a riot police, etc. And different other units, they basically held neutrality. And then those we can call them militants or paramilitaries, and plainly formations, groups of Nazis, they start to repress violently all who were opposing them, all who said, we do not like this coup d'etat. They came to homes of people, took them away. From that time, we had many people disappeared. Officers of that time ruling party, which was basically party of great bourgeoisie, and the officers of Communist Party, they were destroyed by this aggressive groups of militants and neo-Nazis. What happened after? In order to legitimize their power, the winning group of oligarchs, the winning group of great bourgeoisie, decided to do more or less type of usual political process and allow some kind of opposition, not radical against them, but some kind of opposition. They allow it to exist and participate into next vote for parliament, and etc. But this opposition was so much weak that they could not openly compete against the coup itself, but they could only criticize the forces of this coup, forces of new power, which were basically not legitimate in this time, but opposition still could criticize them to a degree. If they exceeded some points, they were repressed. And communist oppositions, socialist opposition, were completely, how it is called, they were not allowed. They were banned completely by law. The parliament in that time issued law. We will prohibit Communist Party, prohibit some left opposition. Okay, there is not left opposition on the scene, only bourgeois opposition. But it didn't end with this. They start to search for somebody who has opinion opposing them. They start to arrest people for only some internet notes, like it usually happens in, for instance, Facebook. Then people debate about points. If some point in debate were towards this support of the people of Donbass, who completely wanted to separate themselves from the government, from the central government of Kiev, or if somebody said opinion in support of people of Crimea who voted to separate themselves as well from the central government of Kiev, when they were repressed. This was before 2nd of May of 2014. This started in February of 2014 and went throughout March and April. This had reaction in society. Society did protest about this. I myself took part in the rallies, in organizing rallies against such a regime in the city of Kharkov, second largest city of Ukraine. There came 9 of us, only 9 people from Kiev, because we could not stay in Kiev anymore. We were forced out because next day after we successfully escaped the mob, the crowd, but it was not mob or crowd, spontaneous one. It was not spontaneous. It was organized group that came armed to destroy our places of our office and other places, to demolish all the remnants of radical opposition to them. So we went to Kharkov. In that time, it was beginning of March, about March 4 of 2014. We organized straight there rallies which exceeded the number of 70,000 people in the city. People went by dozens of thousands against such a regime, which we never had before in Ukraine. We never had such a scale of political repression. No, by no means. From the existing Ukraine of after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Then after this, it took for the government of Kiev months after months, years after years, to repress and oppress all who were opposing them openly by every means. And now, when the escalation came into this civil conflict, the origin of this conflict, this civil conflict, but then now the escalation came, they repressed completely all who were opposition in the past, all who were potential opposition, etc. We have now arrests from February of this year, 2022. Our friends, and not even somebody who we knew by opposition activities of the past, but every journalist who opposing or even have doubts in the activity, in the actions of the present day regime of Kiev, they are arrested, they disappeared. In many cases, we do not know where these people are. In some cases, we have information about their very violent arrest. I show it to Phil Wilayto, pictures of those who were arrested, tortured, etc. Because the Nazis, when they come to get these people, they start to boast about it. They do not hide even. In many cases, they do not hide. They start to boast how they torture people, how they beat them. And our friends, there is one young man who is teacher of geography in my hometown, home city of Dnipropetrovsk. Now it is called Dnieper. Dnieper, why? Because it stays on the river of Dnieper. But they cut the name of Petrovsky because Petrovsky was Bolshevik. Petrovsky was Bolshevik in the time of even in the time of kings, in the time of Russian Empire. He was Bolshevik elected to that time parliament. That is why the name of the city held name of this man. And now it is only Dnieper. This is how it is called. The name of the person who was arrested there and beat to the blood, and it was picture of them stepping on his head with the boots, aiming on him the machine guns straight on the head, and his face was covered with blood. His name is Alexander Matyushenko, very young communist, geography teacher who was very quiet, who had activities before, but no, nothing now. And there are thousands of people like this. We are going to initiate after we will come close to the present day Odessa Solidarity activities. After the 2nd of May, we will surely initiate international activities about the present day political prisoners in Ukraine. And we will give information by volumes, by masses about this. But the Odessa was only one very tragic example of how sharp and how decisive is the struggle in Ukraine by means of violence of neo-Nazis who are ready to burn, cut on pieces, and do whatever with their opponents, because they do not recognize no political process. They recognize violence and violence. They recognize only force, and they do not hesitate to implement this force by every means, with every possible occasion, even to a degree that they cut often innocent people in order to have just show of activity, because they get a lot of money from the central government of Kiev. If they show activity, they get people from the street and tell them, you become our opponent, just say so, and sit in the prison. After this, you release it, but they do this in order to show only. But in most of cases, it is not show only. It is real, true struggle of, not struggle, it is political repression, which can be compared to the worst type of human history, to the worst times of human history. Not even in the newest history, but history of something like medieval, something like Night of Bartholomew in Paris, when they slaughtered all this Huguenots, whatever is there, whatever they were. That is Ukraine of today, and we have millions of facts about this to show to all what regime now is supported by European Union, Great Britain, and somehow with the most democratic and the most free government of such a freedom country as United States. Thank you very much, dear friends.
Thank you, Leo. Truly, this is an issue that anti-fascists around the world must know about and must support. Our final speaker, Heinrich, will address the reaction of European governments and the peace movement in Europe to the current crisis in Ukraine. Heinrich Bueckner is the founder of the Co-op Anti-War Cafe Bar, a meeting place for local and international peace campaigners, activists, artists, tourists and regulars in Berlin, Germany. He has been active in the anti-war movement since 2000. In 2003, at the start of the war against Iraq, he organized a peace camp in front of the US Embassy in Berlin. Then he opened an anti-war gallery at the Techels Art House, and in 2005 founded the Co-op Anti-War Cafe Bar. For some years, Heinrich has been involved in the World Beyond War movement and also is a member of the German Peace Council. Since 2019, he has been co-organizing a weekly event at Berlin's Brandenburg Gate in solidarity with progressive governments and movements in Latin America, as well as organizing several online petitions against war. Heinrich, please proceed.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I'm feeling very honored about it. Yes, I'm based here in Berlin. I'm running this anti-war cafe. And in Berlin, where I moved after school, there are around 100,000 people who have their origin in Russia somewhat. They have maybe 2 passports, or they're living here for some years. So we have a lot of Russian culture here in Berlin, and Russian culture is getting under attack right now. You're speaking to a lot of people who feel scared and threatened. And the problem is that the media is all out against Russia, not only since the conflict started now in Ukraine in February, but also already before. And the Russian, the German government and representatives of all parties in the government are condemning this war. I also do not like this war, but I think we have to put it in perspective. It didn't start in February, it started already before. Since the beginning of the war, Ukraine has received from Germany like around 2,500 anti-aircraft missiles, 900 rocket-propelled grenades, 100 machine guns, anti-bunker launchers, about 100,000 hand grenades, 2,000 mines, and many explosive charges, plus millions of rounds of ammunition. And now they're talking about supplying heavy weapons, which was decided yesterday at this summit at the Ramstein base in Germany. And before, also the Defense Committee already decided to purchase 140 armed drones from Israel for about 150 million euros. And now Rheinmetall, the famous German defense company, has announced the delivery of, listen carefully, 88 tanks. And note that 88 is a code for Heil Hitler, for double H, and you cannot even get a car license plate with that number. So one needs to ask the question, how comes that this number is popping up now in the media? And yeah, the mainstream media is promoting Russophobia, blaming Putin and the Russian government solely for the conflict. And there have been huge protests in all over Germany in many cities, sometimes close to 100,000, sometimes thousands, like many protests, all waving Ukrainian flags, and it's almost like feverish. The German government has expelled 40 Russian diplomats so far. And also there's a good part of Russians living in Berlin and in Germany who are actually against the Russian government, unfortunately, because they also listen to this mainstream media a lot. At the same time, all Russian affiliated media outlets like Russia Today or Sputnik News or all German language or international, they have been banned. You cannot find them. They have to change the web address all the time. At the same time, you can have a Russian FM radio and a Russian language TV satellite station that is still available, but they are anti-Russian. They are promoting the same story against Putin, against the government, and not mentioning the facts that led to this war. At the same time, there's also a lot of discussion about pro-Russian demonstrations in Germany. They put many restrictions out against these protests and car convoys and other meetings. According to opinion polls, it's still very controversial in the population because only 50% of German citizens are for the delivery of heavy weapons, for example. What voices can we listen to still? We have two newspapers here in Germany. One is from the German Communist Party. It's coming out like weekly, and we have one. It's called Junge Welt. It's a daily, and both are reporting pretty fair about this conflict and about the connecting events. And we have quite a few video platforms and blogs that are reporting and are on the right side of history here. And they still have a large audience. Some are linked to the left groups, I would say, but some are also connected to what we sometimes call the Corona skeptics or the Corona, I used to call them Corona deniers, but they are actually also very skeptical of the mainstream media, and they're reporting pretty much all right about the conflict, but at the same time, they also tend to be anti-Chinese, unfortunately. You had some critical reports also in the mainstream media about the ambassador in Ukraine, of Ukraine here in Germany, who is a staunch supporter of Bandera. Phil already talked about the background of this person and his Nazi past. Many places are all over the Ukraine commemorating him. The ambassador, he laid down flowers at his grave in Munich, and he was attacking people who were making this an issue and don't want to hear this right-wing talk. But still, he is here and he is coming to the parliament. People got up, he got standing ovations, and same like the Ukrainian president who came here also to the parliament via video link. And he is also being applauded by everyone. It's like unbelievable. One voice that is very critical is Gerhard Schröder, a former chancellor of SPD. And he had an interview recently in the New York Times, and he said that he is for Russia. He is thinks we need a good connection with Russia and we need each other. And he's opposed to energy embargoes against the country and against sanctions. And he very much has hope that Moscow, after the end of the war, will be connected to Germany again. He says German industry really needs raw materials from Russia, not just oil and gas, but also other things like rare earths. He is also voicing his criticism of the war, but he is saying he is not distancing himself from Mr. Putin, which is very much criticized here in the media. They want to exclude him from the party and they want to put up all kinds of sanctions also against him. He's also on the board of Gazprom, the Russian gas company. Again, in Germany, there's also an appeal out, an online appeal that close to 50,000 people have signed so far. It's a peace appeal. It's against weaponizing the Ukraine. But again, it starts out in a very strange way, which is kind of characteristic for all kinds of statements by the peace movement. It says there's no justification for this war. Putin bears the full responsibility for the dead and for the people fleeing their homes. Putin's justifications for the war are just lies and propaganda. We are very worried about the future of peace and security in Europe and the world. And this unites us with hundreds of thousands of people who took to the streets expressing their outrage against Putin's war. We are in solidarity with the Ukrainian people, and we demonstrate against Putin's war and for peace. Then the appeal uses very progressive demands for demilitarization, for social and environment improvement, for how to use the money that has been promised for the military by the German government and so forth. So a lot of people jumped across this first point and signed it. And I think it's a nuisance to see all these kind of statements coming from people within the peace movement and within the left even. We also have an open letter that was published now in a big publication here in Berlin, the Berliner Zeitung, which is signed by prominent members of the German peace movement as well. And they go on to call the Chancellor Scholz to stay away from going behind this military escalation and delivering heavy weapons to Ukraine. But they also talk about that this war needs to be condemned full out, and that this is like a very, very bad idea, and it could spiral out of control. And it's also, I think, starting out with the wrong tone. The Russian embassy in Berlin notes that war memorials in Berlin and also all over Germany have been desecrated frequently. They have been spray painted, decorated with insults, political slogans, and Nazi symbols. And the embassy calls on German authorities to act accordingly to the Russian-German agreement from December 1992, which both sides have signed, and it obliges the German government to take care of these monuments. The Russian ambassador, he was able to give one single interview to a German newspaper since February 24th, explaining the Russian positions. It was titled, "We have no plans to occupy Ukraine," and then he goes lengthily into the arguments the Russian government normally uses. We have a representative from the Jewish community here in Berlin that is warning against belittling Ukrainian nationalism, which they register quite a bit. And then we have a prominent left person in the left party, Sarah Wagenknecht, who also gave an interview to the Berliner Zeitung, but she's also using the term a criminal, illegal war under international law. There's no justification. It's a criminal war that violates international law, and there needs to be well-founded criticism of the massive armaments policy, which is good again, but it starts out with this very negative connotation of the Russian government. Then 2 weeks ago, we had the Easter March here in Berlin, which is a traditional peace march that has been taken part here in Berlin and in all of our many cities in Germany since the 50s. And also there we had a division in the peace movement because some organizations, or quite a few organizations, are calling for peace, while at the same time full out condemning the Russian invasion, or calling Russia even an imperialist state or a capitalist state. Just a few organizations were in support for Russia, but many people participated in these events. The Russian embassy has thanked for the hundreds of letters which German citizens sent to the embassy expressing their support and solidarity with Russia. They mentioned the fact that despite the Russophobia that had swept Europe and Germany, they still continue to voice their solidarity, and they thanked these people very much. It's also important, I think, to mention the statement by the spokeswoman of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Maria Sokolova, who talked about the close cooperation of the US biolabs in the Ukraine with Germany. She said, among other points, that the Russian armed forces found documents that shed light on the biolabs and what they were doing and what kind of dangerous materials they were working with. And she kind of transferred the message that the German government also knew of these biolabs and was actively participating with. And she is also pointing to the fact that the Russian government, the German government actually was supporting these claims that the Russians might use the material in these biolabs and using them after they found them, which was a claim that was made by Mrs. Newland in front of the Foreign Relation Committee on March 9th when she was asked about these matters. Yes, and then you have a group, an association that's called the Train of the Remembrance. It condemned the exclusion of the state representatives of Russia, of the Russian Federation and the Belarusians participating in honoring the 15,000 Soviet dead of the USSR who lost their lives in the Buchenwald concentration camp. The event took place on April the 10th, 2022. The Ukrainian governor announced on the Ukrainian TV channel, Ukraine 24 Live, which you can catch now since the conflict in the Ukraine started in February. And he called there for the execution of all political dissidents in the Ukraine. He said the search for these citizens is currently underway. And he said all traitors will be executed. A few weeks before, there was a moderator on that TV channel. He openly called to kill all Russians, including women and including children. A few days later, he came out and he said he's sorry for what he said, but this does not include, this excuse does not include the Russian people living inside the Ukraine. Then you had a medical officer connected to the Ukrainian army who came out that Russian prisoners of war should be castrated. And this is unbelievable what has been said on this channel that is available to everyone here in Germany as well, and to all other people around the world. In Spain, just to go around Europe quickly, you know, Spain delivered 200 tons of military equipment after what that was confirmed by Prime Minister Sanchez during his visit in Kiev. A Spanish journalist responded to allegations on public TV in Spain, which is very good. He said that Spain is delivering to Ukraine weapons used to carry out ethnic cleansing in Donbas. Ruben Gisbert, that's his name, was accused publicly of making propaganda for Putin after he traveled to the Donbas. He said, "I'm not defending Russia, I just defend the independence and freedom of Spain." And he talked also about 150 public relation companies paid for by the US waging a propaganda war, particularly in Europe. People I interviewed confirmed that the weapons sent to Ukraine are used to carry out ethnic cleansing in Donbas. Also to mention is Manu Pineda. He's a parliamentarian in the EU Parliament who was calling for no to war, dialogue solutions, no arm delivery, no sanctions, and investigations of all war crimes. He demanded dialogue solutions for the conflict. There were strong protests, also street protests across Spain against the NATO intervention. Spain should not give in to the pressure from NATO any further, were the slogans. According to polls in Spain, about 48% of Spaniards are in favor of support for Ukraine, compared to 52% who are against it. Now coming to Portugal. Portugal's defense minister participated by video conference in the Ukraine Defense Consultative Group held in Germany yesterday and attended by 40 countries. His statement was, Portugal has sent and delivered to the Ukraine about 70 tons of lethal military equipment. Portugal has already taken up more than 30,000 Ukrainian refugees, 20,000 women and 10,000 men. Scandinavia. Finland and Sweden declared to begin NATO applications in May. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are asking the NATO to strengthen its presence, although they are already members. We are not only asking for permanent presence of NATO, but also for a new form of presence. Norway will allocate $44 million to buy weapons and military equipment, and is welcoming Sweden and Finland to join NATO. Now the Netherlands. The Dutch government will provide armored howitzers in condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the strongest possible terms, and is currently deploying fighter aircraft for air policing tasks over NATO territory in Eastern Europe. It's planning to stop using Russian fossil fuels by the end of the year. Belgium has decided to deliver modern weapons to help Ukraine stop the Russian invasion. New shipments should include anti-war, anti-tank weapons, and possibly also heavy armor. A protest action was recently held against the acceptance of oil tankers under Russian flag in the Belgian port of Antwerp. The Czech Republic has delivered tanks, multiple rocket launchers, howitzers, and infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The ex-Czech president, Václav Klaus, he said, the US and the EU are obsessed with Ukraine because they hate Russia. Instead of stopping and preventing the victims across Ukrainian civilians, and finally giving them a normal standard of living, they are saber rattling, he stressed. Italy. Italy's Prime Minister Draghi reiterates full support to Ukraine's Zelensky after a phone call with him and the assistance to the country in the face of the Russian invasion. Italy has delivered massive military aid already. But as Italians' response to the Russian special operation in Ukraine, thousands of letters of solidarity are being sent to the Russian embassy. The Italian people have been voicing their solidarity with the country and with the Russian citizens. 55% of Italians are against delivery of lethal weapons to Kiev, and 69% believe that Italy should maintain a dialogue with Russia. Workers at Pisa airport refused to ship weapons disguised as humanitarian aid to Ukraine. There have been blockades at the port of Genoa. Before the local elections in Italy that are coming up shortly, parties are positioning themselves now about the Ukraine war. In 2 months, about 6 million people are entitled to vote. This is seen as a test for the upcoming parliamentary election in the spring of 2023. The Italian Union, USB, in April 22nd organized a nationwide strike against arms supplies, increase in military spending, cut welfare, defend workers' rights, and raise wages. They stated that the history of the Italian labor movement is a struggle for peace and coexistence, against rearmament policies, war, and for political solutions of conflicts. Just before the strike, the headquarters of the union was visited by police. The raid took place, according to the union, because they fight against the war and for Italy's exit from NATO and Italy's withdrawal from the ongoing war. About 350 deputies and senators refused to listen to Ukrainian President Zelensky's speech to the Italian parliament. This indicates the continued support for Russia and Italy. In total, the Italian parliament has 630 deputies and 350 senators. So about 1/3 of the political representatives didn't take part. A solid bloc of right and left forces is opposing plans to deliver arms to Kiev and plans of Draghi, the prime minister, to increase military spending. In France, it was declared recently that Macron wants to send 100 million euros in weapons to Ukraine. Okay, then, so the French are promising also heavy weapons. In Greece, there was a general strike demanding NATO's refusal to participate in the war. There were more than 60 rallies and demonstrations across the country. The slogans were no participation of our country in the imperialist war. The Greek Communist Party informed that US armored vehicles by sea are delivered, transported to Poland, and railway workers refused to reload the material. According to the Communist Party of Greece, the members blocked a train carrying military equipment. Since the beginning of the military events in Ukraine, more than 3,000 US soldiers and hundreds of armored vehicles and tanks were brought through the Greek port. From there, they go to Romania and Eastern Europe countries. The port is used as an important hub for the NATO troops in Eastern Europe. Zelensky also managed to bring right-wing extremists into the Greek parliament. The Ukrainian president's speech in front of the Greek parliament has caused a loud scandal when two militants of Azov took part in the video conference. Both Azov members referred to the fact that they were actually members of Azov. One even said that his grandfather fought against the Nazis in World War II, and that he now fights Nazis from Russia. MPs from the Greek Communist Party refused to attend the meeting, and even Alexis Tsipras from the Syriza party called the performance of the Azov people unacceptable. Turkey is accused its NATO allies wanting war with Ukraine to last longer in order to weaken Russia. The Turkish foreign minister added after the talks in Istanbul, we did not think that the war would take this long. There are those who want this war to continue. And we also would like to mention one more thing. There's a letter by veterans and children of the Great Patriotic War to the German government and to the people of Germany. It's titled The Tragedy in Ukraine. A group of friends here in Berlin have set up an appeal to support this letter, which has been signed by more than 250 groups and citizens, and has been delivered in the meanwhile to the embassy of the Russian Federation. So far, thank you very much for being able to participate here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Heinrich. We will include all of that in the description of the video, along with the appeal, links to how you can contact the relevant groups, and some other things. This concludes our webinar. Thank you very much for watching.